The Truth Girls.
Hi everyone, it's Sonia here. So I'd like to give you an update on some interesting things that have been going on in Portland, Oregon. The feds pulling back, the protests becoming more peaceful, and an arrest being made for arson. Before I start, I'd just like to remind you, please like me on Facebook. Thank you for supporting me on Patreon, which keeps my channel going. And thanks for subbing to my backup channel, which is Truther Girls TV. And also, I still have available the pouches here, which eliminate odors by removing viruses, bacteria, fungus, and mold. And also have tabs, which can make a deodorizing cleaning solution. And it's still 15% off, no shipping and handling for a pack of 3 pouches, even if you live in Canada. So if you're interested, please click the link below for more information. Okay, so here's the update. Actually, quite a lot has happened just like in the last couple of days. Feds absent from Portland protests for first time in 3 weeks. Despite President Trump's assertions that feds would remain in the city until there is safety, federal officers were notably absent from Thursday night's protest in Portland, Oregon, for the first time in 3 weeks. Following a public announcement from Oregon Governor Kate Brown that the White House had agreed to a phased withdrawal of the controversial federal forces, Trump took to Twitter on Thursday to insist the officers he directed to Portland wouldn't be going anywhere until there is safety. Kate Brown, governor of Oregon, isn't doing her job. She must clear out and in some cases arrest the anarchists and agitators in Portland. If she can't do it, the federal government will do it for her. We will not be leaving until there is safety. That is what President Trump had said. So the troops were absent for the first time, and what happened? Surprisingly, it was quite peaceful. Thursday night's protest passed off without major incident or intervention by the police in the absence of federal forces. Wow, how is that possible? I want you to see what the Portland Police Bureau says themselves without the interference of media, so you don't think that it's because it's a right or left-wing paper. So they say people gave speeches, vehicular traffic was blocked, the speeches ended and the majority of people congregated outside the federal courthouse. Through the rest of the night and into the next morning, the crowd was subdued. Some lit fires, some climbed the fence outside the federal courthouse, threw objects, and chanted. Around 1:30 a.m., people started a bonfire in the middle of Southwest 3rd Avenue in front of the courthouse. People brought plywood and other flammable materials to keep it going. Over the next hour, the number of people dwindled down to a few dozen. There was no police interaction with the crowd. So basically, it just kind of petered out. Personally, I'm not surprised because a lot of you had seen my video when I covered the protests here in Montreal. And at the end there, they had the stormtroopers out. They had all that stuff ready. And it was really tense between the police and the protesters. It was so tense that I was getting scared. I thought I was going to get caught in the middle of like a riot with rubber bullets flying. And then something really weird happened. All of a sudden, the cops just turned around and left. And what happened then? Did everybody just start smashing up downtown? No, actually it just got really chill. Everybody just started hanging out downtown. The police leaving totally diffused the problem. If they had stayed and thrown tear gas, I'm pretty sure it would have been a riot. So I saw this firsthand, and that made me feel like the very strong presence of law enforcement, local or federal or whatever, I think it can really aggravate a problem, at least as far as protests go. So that doesn't mean to say that Portland is doing nothing. Actually, an 18-year-old was arrested for arson for throwing an explosive device at the Portland courthouse. He's facing federal arson charges. Basically, they got the act on camera and the suspect was identified through social media posts. Investigators said they found a Twitter post depicting a product review for the vest worn by the suspect that night. The reviewer stated she got the vest for her grandson, who had been protesting downtown every night, and said the vest does the job. So basically, this kid got busted by his own grandmother's online review. So I think this is going in the right direction. They need to be arresting the people who are actually committing crimes and not just attacking the crowd on the whole. That's how I feel about it. I think that's what makes the most sense. A couple other things while we're on the subject of Portland, based on some comments that I had from some of my viewers on the last video. Regarding Antifa being a terrorist organization, I know there had been some talk about this, but as of this time, unless today something has changed, Antifa has not been designated a terrorist organization. And as for the people in Portland who were put into those vans, it's unclear to what extent those detained allied themselves with the Antifa movement. You guys, I am the truther girl, okay? You see my channel below, it says the truther girls. I'm an old school truther, okay? I mean, I think things have changed in the meantime. I'm kind of really surprised at some of the responses that I get from people these days. But back in my old school truther days, this started out as an anti-war movement. Let's bring it back to basics. If you remember, at the time, we thought that America and, you know, Canada, who does get on board with what America does, we had entered into a war for false reasons. It was an unwinnable war against an invisible enemy that was going to go on pretty much forever, according to the Department of Defense. That's what they said. And we felt that we had gotten involved in this war for the wrong reasons, you know, that it wasn't justified. And that it wasn't really just about the war, it was about the New World Order. And that the war basically just gave the government carte blanche to pass all kinds of laws that would not only, you know, like, yes, it was supposed to be about the war on terror, but really it was also going to be about your life in America or your life in Canada, such as the Patriot Act, hastily passed 45 days after 9/11 in the name of national security. The Patriot Act was the first of many changes to surveillance laws that made it easier for the government to spy on ordinary Americans by expanding the authority to monitor phone and email communications, collect bank and credit reporting records, and track the activity of innocent Americans on the internet. While most Americans think it was created to catch terrorists, the Patriot Act actually turns regular citizens into suspects. This was part of what came out of that whole thing, what happened back in 2001. That and the changes to the definitions of terrorist activity. The unlawful use of force and violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives, which is quite broad. I mean, you don't have to be an actual enemy combatant. An enemy combatant is a person who's fighting against the military while being in an unofficial, ununiformed army, right? That, I mean, it's like guerrilla warfare versus an actual military. So they can't call them soldiers because they're not a real army. So they call them enemy combatants, and then they don't have to follow all the laws they usually have to follow when it comes to dealing with, you know, captured soldiers and stuff like that. I've seen people in my own comments describing protesters as enemy combatants. Like, it's a slippery slope, you know. If you can start designating Americans as terrorists just for what group they're involved in without having actually done anything, that's pretty slippery. If you can then designate acts committed during a riot that comes out of a protest as terrorism, that's pretty slippery. Why terrorism? Why not arson? And this very broad definition to intimidate or coerce a government in furtherance of political or social objectives. Isn't that what they're doing right now? Couldn't that, in a slippery way, be called a kind of terrorism? How much more slip do you have to get before basically any kind of protest could be called a kind of terrorism, or you could be considered a terrorist by participating in a group? If the protest ends up having some violence in it, they could say you're trying to intimidate the government or coerce the government. Maybe not even violence, maybe just blocking roads. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to be very careful with this and not be like, oh yeah, well, Antifa, they're terrorists, and all protesters are Antifa, and they all fall under terrorism, and they're enemy combatants, and the federal government should be able to use anti-terrorism laws to squash this. Because, you know, the next step could be that the definition is broader and broader, and before you know it, I mean, you're literally in a police state. Like, we're going into KGB, you know, and World War II Germany territory here. Remember, I'm the libertarian, staunch advocate for civil liberties. So this kind of stuff raises alarm bells for me. I think for good reason. People were bringing up the Homeland Security Act. Primary mission of the Homeland Security Act is to prevent terrorist attacks within the United States, reduce the vulnerability of the United States to terrorism, and minimize damage and assist recovery from terrorist attacks that occur in the United States. So if you start invoking the Homeland Security Act to deal with riots, yes, there are riots that come out of protests, civil unrest, you want to invoke this kind of stuff to deal with that? What are you doing on a truther channel? Or has the truth movement changed so much that the people that were calling this stuff out 10 years ago saying, yeah, we see what you're doing, you're bringing in a police state. Now they're like, yes, they should use these laws to stop people from destroying monuments or federal buildings. I mean, we're talking about buildings here. It's not like they bombed the whole downtown or something. They're attacking a courthouse. We need to keep it in perspective. That's really how I feel. You got to keep it in perspective. Don't start bringing up Homeland Security, anti-terrorism laws, stuff like that. You want to go down that road? I think it's very dangerous. On the other hand, I do understand, believe me, I know about the group. I've talked about this so many times, this group momentum that has been fueling these protests. I mean, if you're gonna say that the riots, are an Antifa, that they're acts of terrorism, then you need to be looking at who is behind the groups that are doing this. Who trained them? Who helped them get that organized? This wasn't organic. It's not a secret. That's not a conspiracy theory. Momentum. They're involved in training these groups. So, who are you going to point the finger at? And that's the weird thing. Everybody's like, you think it's okay to grab somebody off the street? You're doing nothing to address the whole group, this movement incubator that was behind this whole thing, that is using this for political objectives. And I think that President Trump knows what's going on. I get it. He knows. And I think he probably doesn't like some of these laws that have been passed before, but he's thinking we can use them now to do something about this problem regarding momentum. So, it's like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You don't do anything about it, you're going to end up with communism. You do something about it, you're setting a precedent for a police state. It's difficult, right? There's no easy answers. But I think President Trump knows what's going on, and he's thinking, okay, we can use some of this to squash it, so that momentum doesn't get what they want. So there's not like a communist leftist takeover of America. I understand that. I totally get that, and I still think it's dangerous to set the precedent of using those laws on Americans. For the big picture, I think it's dangerous. Because what if a Democrat government comes into power anyway, and then they can use those laws as they see fit? There have been precedents set, it's been done before, and now they can do that. What if they do that against Republicans who are protesting, right? Like you might say now, oh, let's use it against these Democrats, or let's use it against these people who were maybe Antifa or they're associated with momentum. That's okay. But later, this is going to come and bite you on the ass. If the Democrats or whatever leftist extremist party you have wants to use these laws against you, and those laws are all in the books, you got a KGB situation happening. That's what I'm so concerned about. So I think actually under the current circumstances, it's going quite well in Portland. The feds have pulled back, things have subdued, which is great. That's what you want. And maybe there will be no need for the feds to or even the police to come back in and for more conflicts. And they have filed criminal charges against someone for arson, which is what they should be doing. They should be arresting the people who are caught in the act of doing something, and not just attacking the entire crowd. They need to find the organizers or the people who are committing criminal acts. You have to be able to charge them with something. That whole grabbing off the street is very reminiscent of what happened with the G8 summit in Toronto. And they had set up this Torontonomo, and they were grabbing people and detaining them en masse, and it was absolutely scandalous. We were like, we don't want to live in this police state. This is not what we want. So luckily it hasn't happened again up here. And I don't want to see it happen in America either. So anyhow, I just wanted to give you an update that things have settled down quite a bit in Portland. And I wanted to give you a little more clarification on why, you know, I'm not going to be the one to say, oh yes, send them in and squash this thing. Because there's a lot of implications for that. That could be very serious and bite you on the ass down the road. So I hope this is useful to you. Don't forget to check out the links for these things with the discount. Thank you again for your support on Patreon. Thanks for listening to me, and I'll see you next time.